Okay. Hi and good morning. Welcome to our workshop on research questions. I'm Lizzie Santiago. I work for the College of Engineering. I've been in engineering for 10 and a half years. Okay. As part of this workshop, we have
Aimee Morewood, and I'm in the College of Education and Human Services, and I've been here since 2007.
And I'm Marina Galvez. I'm in the School of Pharmacy, and I've been here for the last 5 years.
Okay. So what we decided today in terms of presentation is the following. We're going to talk about what is a research question, why research questions are important in general, okay, especially for those of us that we are doing educational research. We're going to talk about different types of research questions. We are going to talk about how to write proper, meaningful, okay, important research questions. And we're basically going to go what's needed next, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about theoretical framework as well as other components of your research work. It's not working? That's okay.
Okay. So writing a research question is one of the first critical steps in the research process, right? First, you need to figure out what is your question so that you can move forward with what you're doing. So we want to really, this is why we put this presentation together, because in our last session, we talked about research questions, and we had a lot of people coming to us or asking questions at the end of it about getting started with the research question. I'm sorry, you guys don't have the clicker.
Yeah.
So what is a research question? It's a question that arises from a problem or issue. And in particular, when you're thinking about SoTL, it's what's going on in your classrooms, right? So what are you thinking about or observing or noticing in your classrooms? And what kind of questions do you have about those things that are going on? So what does a research question impact? Everything. Oh, I said I wouldn't yell. I should have signed that contract. Everything. I'm just so excited. So it guides the project's direction, methodology, analysis, findings, conclusions, implications, and future work. So really, this is why that initial slide of it's the most important thing you can do, you should really think about that, because it is the most important thing you can use to structure your project. Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. So research questions using a qualitative approach. You present a topic, you discuss the problem or issue that led to the need for the study. So again, thinking about SoTL, what are you noticing in your classes or in a particular class that's catching your attention? Does it have something to do with students? Does it have something to do with the design? Does it have something to do with the way you're reflecting and planning, right? So you have to think about what's the problem that keeps coming up when you're working on your class. Then you need to dive into the literature, right? You need to see who else is talking about these topics in regards to what you're particularly focused on. Then think about where are the gaps in literature. So you look at the literature and you see all of these things on X, but you're really interested in Y. Well, there you go. You found the sweet spot, right? That's where you want to take a look at it and say, what is missing from the literature and how can I add to the professional field? And then also you want to think about who's going to benefit from this research. Is it other faculty? Is it teachers in schools? Is it clinicians? Is it people working in hospitals? Who would be interested in this particular work once I'm ready to disseminate it? As far as quantitative research goes, you'll see it's very similar. You think about presenting a topic, thinking about the problem that led to that study, or the need for the study. You're going to dive into that research. So these are all the same so far. And then can you quantify the impact of your problem and the effect of the intervention? So this is a little bit different. In qualitative research, obviously you take a little bit more of a narrative approach in describing it. And this is obviously more with numbers to describe what's going on. So when you think about designing your research question, we talked about thinking about generating a problem statement. So I have a lot of blanks here. The next slide, I'm going to fill them in. This is like a bad game show right here. We have to try to figure it out, right? And I'm in literacy education, so this I'm really going to have you use your context clues, and now you get to try to figure it out. No, I'm just teasing. So the purpose of this SoTL, and then you take your design study, your narrative, your case study, right? This is setting the stage for what you're going to do in your research question. The study is to understand, describe, develop, discover. You want to think about those verbs that you're using because that's really going to set you up for how you're going to set up your project. And then you're going to discover, the central phenomenon of the study. You need to think about what is the focus here, right? And who are the participants, and where is the context, where is it going to happen? And at this stage in the research, the topic will be generally defined as, and you give sort of just a general overview of what you're talking about here. All right, so now we're going to see if you came up with the right answers. This is an example. The purpose of this SLT narrative study is to describe the impact of social presence on candidates' content knowledge in the literacy education program. So you know who made this slide. It was me. At this stage in the research, the impact of social presence on candidates' content knowledge will be generally defined within an asynchronous whole group class discussion board context. So I have a lot of details in there that now I can sort of tease apart when I'm thinking about my methodology and my analysis. What am I looking for? I've set it up here. So when you're thinking about generating a central question, so over here, I have my first attempt. So this is what I wanted to know. How is my students' learning impacted in an online course? This is really general and vague, right? It's hard to then write about that because it's like there's just so much that could happen there. And as researchers, we want all that stuff to happen, but we need to take it and revise it a little bit. And so I got a little bit more specific. I added some more details to my research question. Now my question says, how is my students' content knowledge impacted by using discussion boards? So I pulled this in a little bit, right? I'm now looking specifically at their content knowledge, and I'm looking at a specific tool that they're using in online learning. I'm not looking at the 25 things that they're doing in my online classes because they're so highly engaged. They're doing 25 things. I'm thinking just about one specific tool, which is the discussion board. And then I'm going to take it a bit further and go to that second revision and say, how are LE candidates, that's literacy education, candidates' social presence, while using asynchronous whole group online discussion boards impacting their content knowledge. Now I'm really specific, right? I'm talking not just about when they get together and talk, but I'm looking about when they're working independently on these discussion boards, how is that sense of community or social presence impacting their content knowledge? So now it's really tight. Now I'm going to say this is my last version, but anybody that's written a research question, this is not it. But I'm getting closer here. I'm getting closer down this continuum. So when we think about self-study, I think this just really ties in so closely with what we do here in this group of SoTL. So self-study teachers initiate questions about their own practice, which they generate from observations of and personal experiences with their classrooms, right? You guys are in the weeds. You're digging in and you're trying to figure out what's working and what's not working, and that's where these questions are starting to come out. But you don't want to get stuck down here on my chart. You want to keep moving in this direction, right? So I found this article, and I retyped this from the Ward Parsons, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, Harmarson article, but I really liked the way they sort of set up these self-study questions. And if you're interested in looking at self-study or in my world, online instruction, this is an excellent article, and they talk about how they studied their online instruction. Even if you're not interested in those two topics, it's really interesting how they lay out their self-study. So what they have here in this table is they basically looked through the literature, which, as you know, is very important from previous slides, and they found sort of where these research questions fell, and they categorized them into these three areas. Again, they were focusing on online learning within teacher education. So they categorized them into knowledge issues, course design issues, and then change issues. So again, kind of thinking about when you write your research questions, what are you looking for? How would you classify your questions? Maybe you have 5 questions that you come up with, and then you sort of categorize them to see, are they all coming into, oh, I'm really interested in students' knowledge issues, or boy, you know what, my focus is design issues, and that will help you dig into the literature even further in those particular areas. Okay, So now you're done listening to me for a bit, and you get to pull out that handout. So we have this handout here, and we're going to ask you to sort of work through this. We're going to work with you throughout this session so that you can think about your research questions. So for A, based on your discipline and beliefs about teaching and learning, what do you want to improve or change? What specific problem do you want to address? So on your sheet, if you could look at A and fill that in. And then I'm also going to read B to you, which says, one thing I would like to investigate is, and then C is my main goal in investigating this is, and answer to the question there. So if you could work through A, B, and C, then we're going to share these as a group, okay?
At the beginning of the session, we basically see the classroom as our source of inspiration. Okay, so the whole idea here is basically within your environment, within your classroom, within the setting, okay, within your college, what are the problems that you see, okay, that needs to be solved? So the question here is, what do you feel that needs to be improved in general? Okay, within the context of your work, of your classroom, what are the things that needs to be improved? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so basically we're talking about improving student engagement.
And just because I work in an online program, do you mean in a face-to-face classroom, or do you mean in an online? Just curious, or just overall? Overall. Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm. What else do you feel needs to be improved? Yes.
I guess it's similar, but in a face-to-face classroom, kind of involvement in discussion.
Okay, so basically participation, okay? Okay. Yes.
Encouraging more independent learning outside the classroom.
Okay.
Faculty directives.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what else do you guys think needs to be improved?
I teach lecture and laboratory, and I feel the students tend to compartmentalize the knowledge between those two streams.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, fancy word.
Mm-hmm. Okay, integration of knowledge in general.
I'm glad she's writing, because I wouldn't have come up with integration either.
Uh-huh. You know, I see the same problem, so I can identify.
This is not about you,
Yes.
Critically evaluate information.
Oh my goodness, all of these are my topics. Okay, basically critical thinking. Okay, anything else that you guys feel that students should improve in general? Uh-huh. Okay. Okay, anything else? Okay, so basically one thing I would like to investigate is we're talking about student engagement, independent learning. We're basically doing the topics, okay? Integration of knowledge, critical thinking, theory versus practice application. My main goal in investigating this is what? Why do we want this to be investigated? Why should we investigate this?
Why is it important to you to think about student engagement? We're going to start with you, because you were the first one to offer up anything. Like, why is that important?
Sure. I mean, I teach mostly large lecture classes.
Okay.
So there's a lot of need for 40 plus of that.
Yeah.
And so I can't really be one-on-one,
Yeah.
120 or 150. So I
You want me to carry?
put everyone, of course.
Sure.
Just try to get them they gain interest in the material. If not, they can be excited about everything over time.
Uh-huh.
But ways to get them at least actively thinking and asking about it in class, or trying to get them to even think about these things. My real goal now is think about it outside of class. Now, I'm just talking about plants now that everything's in bloom. It's a great way for me to talk about, what's flowering right now. And I'm getting them to start telling me what's flowering, and I'm like to be sort of in their heads in that regard.
So basically, to have more. Can we phrase this differently? It's more kind of class participation to improve.
Yeah, I want them to be thoughtful about the material, both in class and outside of class.
Okay. Basically, think. Okay. I never write, so you guys can figure that out. I can type. Okay. Why? Why? Okay, so your main goal is, who mentioned critical thinking?
I teach library. I teach a library research class, and so it's an introduction, so it's information literacy, and I want the students to more critically engage with the sources they're using and kind of think critically about it instead of the very superficial evaluations that they do.
To improve engagement with the material. Okay. Anything else? Yes.
So I think that I just want to create a classroom environment in which the students are motivated to contribute, not for their grade necessarily, but because that there are going to be a number of other benefits.
Like learning.
Absolutely. Okay. Okay. Anything else before we move on?
How about the integration or application from knowledge to practice or lab?
So from an integration perspective, I find it interesting that you use the word belief in this. Like on your main slide, you use belief, whereas in most scientific studies, one doesn't necessarily use the expression belief. However, that's. But I suppose my belief is from an integration perspective that I'm actually trying to make the students' life easier. I don't know whether the correct word is effective learning or efficient learning, but I feel that if they do work towards integration, it will make their life easier eventually. So, I believe.
Anybody else? You want to add something there?
I feel like this is more of a, I guess, a little bit more on kind of deciding what's best for student practice in my department. There is a divide as to what's the best way to get clinical translation. Those of us who think that falls on the student to take the knowledge and apply it, and those of us who think simulations would be the best way to do it. And so it's kind of almost a discussion about methods because simulations are very time consuming. So I don't know, I guess I'm kind of jumping to a design already, but And a philosophical belief. Also, Your yes. or program.
So, I don't know. It would be interesting, and I'm jumping ahead here, but when we think about diving into the literature on something like that, or what you were speaking of, like what's in the literature that people are saying? Is it simulations that are preparing? I know it's communication.
Yeah.
And so is that preparing people better, or is it when there are no simulations and they're expected to just go out and do, right? So, I mean, I don't know the research on that, but that would be like the gap, that it's almost like that's where you want to go and see what's going on. And you may have already done some of that just because this seems like it's, obviously you're interested in it, so.
On the integration of knowledge one, I think my interest here is that I want to balance keeping from, the whole, not stressing the students out, making their learning easier with the idea that they still need to be lifelong learners. I teach clinical students as well, nursing, medicine, where the field is continuously updating and changing. So they can't just walk out and say, we've got the knowledge that we need for our life. We're checked off and done.
Check.
They need to know how to do this on their own without us guiding them the whole time.
And want that spirit to continue
that they're
to
motivated
do
to
it.
do that afterward. And so I think, so I mean, a lot of this stuff is all resonating as very interrelated questions and concerns. But yeah, that's the overall goal, is make sure that they can do this without us.
Yeah, right.
Plus, if they comprehend, and I think that is a challenge for students to understand that if the comprehension is there, the understanding is there, then you don't have to memorize because you can reason things out. And I think for the science field, that is a challenge. Like, oh no, I just want to memorize and forget about the Krebs cycle, right? But if you reason things out, even though you have to memorize some names, you will be able to apply that and learn later on when new medications or new therapies and new interventions come on. So I keep it here? Okay. Okay, so I don't know how many of you have already tried doing any type of SoTL.
Are any of you working
Anybody?
in educational research?
Have any of you done any other type of research? Laboratory research, okay. So this is very similar to what scientific research is. Basically, we are going to be classifying which type of questions can we come up with. So the very basic one will be just descriptive. So basically, let's say I am implementing a simulation. Okay. How many students pass the simulation? That would be descriptive. I'm telling you, I implemented this simulation practice. What was the success? Or can I say, okay, either students or here, we have a session, and I can say that there will be like 80% of the session is run by female faculty or female students. I'm just describing an observation. Or out of an active learning session, I had how many students were first generation. It's just descriptive. I'm telling you a fact that I can count.
So basically, we're not doing any intervention.
Nothing.
We're basically using what we observe, okay, and asking a question based on those observations.
The next type of question will be an observation and relational. So basically, we are going to be doing a relationship. So let's go back to the examples that we brought before. We said one was about first generation or about gender, female, male. Now, do we see a different outcome if we look and compare results from males and females? Can we identify different type of learners? Let's say we have a survey with the students and we have auditive learners, visual learners, kinetic learners. Do they learn different? Do we have a relationship there?
Or are tactile
Like kinetic, yeah.
better in math? That could be a question.
Now, the third type will be a causal. So basically, we're going to be looking at variables, that is the cause, that is going to determine the effect. So if you notice, we are jumping steps. So the first one, in order to do this, you have to be able to first observe what is going on and then identify a relationship. If you identify a relationship because you have observed, now you can try to identify a cause and effect. So, for example, a question is in the clinical students. Some of them are going to be exposed to see patients before coming to the classroom. Some of them is the first time. Do they learn better? Is there any correlation between previous exposure or being a lab tech or being exposed to something and the success in the course? Now we are looking at a correlation. So it's a little different from the cause and effect. And now we are looking also on intervention. Will my new teaching technique, that is the cause, improve our students' grades? But for that, you have to compare with something, and that is a challenge. So how do we challenge, how do we compare these things? So we are going to be looking at how are we going to be measuring and asking those questions. So we could do a longitudinal study. So basically, let's say you have the whole semester for yourself, and you're going to take different time points, the same thing that we do in the laboratory setting or in a clinical setting. You're going to be looking how my students were, my baseline, at the beginning of the semester. Where the confidence level? What was the knowledge level? Now you can either run part of the semester without the intervention and see how they do, and then do the intervention and see how the intervention is affecting the baseline. That will be longitudinal. You are doing things across the semester. Or you can do cross-sectional, and that is a little challenging, because for half of the semester, let's say, you have a group of students that have been exposed to the change, and the other half has not been exposed to the intervention. And then you cross them. So basically, you have been comparing each of the interventions within themselves. So each student becomes the control and the case. That makes sense? Now, the other question that we have is, when do we measure? Do we ask the students' feedback for every single time intervention? Is it going to be causing a student fatigue? Because they're like, again, you're another survey. Or do you say, okay, I'm going to simplify my study. I'm going to do a final point. I'm going to get feedback, but at least I know that the students won't be complaining or just marking yes to everything because they're tired of surveys. So we have to determine that, and that will be correlated with the type of question that we want to address. Some of them we will need multiple times. Let's say you are in a capstone, I don't know, in different modules, and you want to see the assessment. Then you will have to do multiple points. If it's a whole semester intervention, maybe with that final point and a beginning point will be sufficient. That, again, will be determined based on your type of question that you want to address and the problem that you want to solve.
Related to what she said, I've seen students marking the center, the middle answer, all over in the survey because they do get fatigued from doing too many surveys. So we do have to be extremely careful when designing surveys. As we mentioned before, we are, most of us, in the classroom, okay? And there are a lot of variables that can be changed, okay? So there is an almost infinite number of research questions in the context of your classroom, and in the context of your teaching, and in the context of learning. So what it means is there is so much that we can research, okay? There are an infinite number of questions that we can ask, okay? And the idea here is what are truly the important ones, okay? So that's one of the things that you guys have to think about before you begin doing SoTL research. I'm going to rephrase some of the things that we have mentioned already in terms of writing the research question, okay? We have identified already a broader subject or topic that we want to research in general, okay? And I can tell you right now that we have a lot of topics here already, okay? So this is always the first step, okay? I will tell you that I do care about critical thinking skills, so I was really happy when I saw this one here, okay? I do care about retention in general. I care about my students that are failing in math. I care about why they are failing in math. These are things that come from observation inside my classroom or while I'm advising students. So you have to think a little bit about what you observe within the context, and we keep saying the same thing, and figure out what is truly important, okay? Which are the things that you think truly are meaningful and can affect, okay, what you want to study, okay? Once you have your subject of interest, I always recommend people to do a preliminary research. You don't want to end with a question that someone have already answered. There are some topics that have been already, I call them like burnout. Everybody have done research. Everyone wants to do a flipped classroom, but there is so much research on it already. I mean, it may not be unique, okay? If you find something within flipped classroom that no one have investigated already, that could be a good topic. I mean, nothing wrong with going with flipped, but there are some topics already that have been extensively researched, and you don't want to redo the wheel. You don't want to do something that someone have already done, okay? So I always look for topics that are unique and are relevant in general, that I can gather information and I can make some sort of impact in general, okay? But as I said, literature review is extremely important once you identify the topic, okay? Okay, after that, you're going to start asking questions, okay? Keep in mind that how is happening, what is happening, okay? Why is happening, okay? Those are important questions to ask once you have done your observation in general, okay? I always ask why my students are doing not that well, those that start in Math 126, and when I say no, doing well, I'm talking about the retention tends to be lower compared with calc-ready students. Why? Okay, is it something that they are bringing from high school, misconceptions, okay? What is that is basically hampering their ability to succeed, okay? They go through math again here, they go through many courses, but these are examples, okay? So these are questions that we basically have to ask to figure out what is truly meaningful in general, okay? Once we have asked a lot of what, how, why, okay, we can make our list of potential questions, okay? And you have to be really careful. We can come up with 10. I can tell you 20 questions that are all associated with critical thinking. Some of them are important, okay? Some of them, someone have already researched those, okay? It's a matter of going back to the literature and finding that information, okay? But it's important for you to make the list, okay? And figure out which are the ones that are of interest for you, okay? And which are the ones that are of interest for others, okay? I like to publish, okay? And if there is something that has been already done and I send a paper, I'm sure the reviewer will say, I mean, there is no way we can publish this because someone else have already done extensive work on this, okay? So you have to be extremely careful. In the same way for NSF grants or grants in general, okay? They look for uniqueness, they look for good research questions, good experimental plans. So you have to look at both, what is of interest of you as well as what is of interest for others in general. Okay, so what's next? Okay, so we basically talk about the different topics. We talk about what you care about in general within your context. So we want you to generate some research questions, okay? So we are currently on number D on your handout, okay? So based on your topic, based on your interest, based on your observation, which are potential research questions that you can ask within your context, okay? Context of your student, context of your work. We're giving you a few minutes just to think about those questions. And I'm looking for volunteers, people that are willing to share their research question or questions. You know my story, so don't worry. Okay, so who else is willing to share their research question? I just have to.
Anybody else? All right. The two first had to write their own, but. Anybody else would like to share a research question? Go ahead.
Sure. My colleagues creating an incentive system to get students to attend office hours and tutoring we have available. So I guess our question is, do students that take advantage of these resources get help outside of class? Do they perform any better in class than those who don't take advantage of these resources?
Mm-hmm.
Do
you say those are resources, additional resources?
Yeah,
Or, okay.
basically, if they get help outside of class,
Okay.
does it improve their performance? So we're always trying to encourage them to take advantage of office hours and tutoring because they're really underutilized. But only a small fraction do.
In which department are they?
Biology.
Biology.
So we created, or colleagues, I didn't create this, but a system where we offer them extra credit to go once at least to office hours. And we just began this, so we don't know what the results are. Certainly more students are going. We haven't looked at performance, and we're also curious whether they are more likely to attend again because they only get the extra credit for one time. But we're hoping it starts a good habit and makes them comfortable with getting help outside of class.
Do you want to share yours?
Hold it up and Vanna white it, you know.
Okay, next one.
So I'm interested if student scores and outcomes improve when simulations are paired with technology compared when we just use technology alone. And so the technology I'm talking about is we have a lot of specialized software that we use in the clinic, and we think if we just give students access to the software and let them play with it, that they'll be fine.
Okay.
So the question is what if we put them in a simulated situation where they actually have to utilize the software?
And can I just clarify, simulated situation meaning like with actual live humans or with
Yes.
like, okay. I didn't know if you were going to do like a simulation within like a
Program. Or,
within a program or like
VR,
where you-
virtual reality.
yeah, virtual reality. That's what I was
Yeah,
thinking
no,
of.
with-
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, no, we're good, we're good.
How do students evaluate information? How do they evaluate information in quote unquote real life, like outside the classroom? Where do they go when they have an information need in quote unquote real life? And do or will they transfer these real life habits of evaluation to assignments in the classroom?
It's too many questions. No.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have given you the marker. No,
Yeah.
just teasing. I'm just teasing you. So, I mean, that's really dense when we think about questions. I mean, there's like 3 questions within that question, right? So it's almost like you'd have subcategories of questions once you start to really tease this out and work on it, because you'll be able to pull from one data set all those answers, but you got to think about it a little bit differently to get the answers that you need, obviously.
I think the one I'm most interested in is what do students, when they have to get information in real life, outside the classroom and evaluate it, what do they do? How do they evaluate information?
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. So you're thinking like when they are like, oh, I want to know about X, I'm going to Google it. And then how do I know that my Google search gave me factual information on whatever?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, it's not cognition, right? It's just where they go.
Right.
Okay, okay.
And how they evaluate. Right.
Okay.
And do they, if they've been through our class, do they use what we will?
Yeah. Are they applying what you've been teaching them for weeks? Okay.
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
I had a long list, but one of them I think sort of resonated the most as I wrote them out was how much does the student perception of their own workload or their fatigue levels impact their willingness for self-directed learning?
Yeah. So in my field, we'd call that grit. I don't know, like, do they have the grit to keep at it when they're really, do they have the self-efficacy to just dig in and keep going on things? And I think regardless of your fields, we're all worried or concerned or want that for our students. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, I'm sure your other questions are similar in nature, but you'll be able to pull from the data set on how to answer that. You just got to make sure you collect the data that makes sense there. That's a whole nother presentation. We're not ready to answer those questions just yet.
Other questions? Okay, how do we evaluate questions in general, okay? So what we're giving you is basically, many of you are familiar with SMART goals, right? They have to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, okay? The same thing happens with your research questions, okay? So your research questions cannot be too broad, otherwise there's no way you can answer them. They cannot be too narrow. They could become meaningless if they are too narrow, okay? They have to be measurable, okay? So you have to be sure that there is a metric that could be used, okay, for the variables that you are planning to measure, okay, according to your research question, okay? It has to be attainable, okay? There has to be definitely a solution, okay? It has to be relevant, okay? And here is where we put the flipped classroom, sorry. If I'm bringing flipped classroom again, okay? There has to be an issue that, is of relevance in general for you, okay? For your students, as well as for society in general, okay? And it has to be time-bound, okay? There has to be a time frame associated with your study, okay? You have to study students over a given period of time. One class period, okay, one semester, okay? Is it a longitudinal study? Okay, so you have to be sure it can be done within the context of the time that you have available, okay, to do the study, okay? So all those things, okay, SMART, okay, has to be part of the way that you design your research questions, okay? I basically restated what I just mentioned, okay, already, okay? So as I said, we all can remember SMART in general because we have already used them with goals in general, but this is extremely important, okay? Sometimes you get proposals, okay? You read proposals, and some of them don't get approved in general because there is no way that people can do this study within the time frame that they are proposing for the study, okay? Or sometimes the research questions cannot be answered, okay? They have no metrics, okay? There is no way that they can come up with a suitable metrics to be able to measure, okay, what they are proposing within the research questions, okay? So we want you to have good research questions, okay? But at the same time, you have to consider all these parameters. Okay, what I want you guys to put it in context, and I try to make my best figure here. This is the best I can do in terms of drawing, is the following. Every time that you do research, okay, it has to be grounded, okay? It has to be grounded on literature, okay? It has to be grounded on preliminary data because it has to be evidence-based, okay? You cannot do research out of air in general. It has to be grounded, okay? So if you don't do a proper literature research, your research is going to be completely meaningless. Your questions could be really of importance, okay? But they are not grounded. Your methodology will not be grounded on the literature research, okay? So it's extremely important for you to have an evidence-based approach, okay, to your research problem, okay? Not only your work, okay, or your research question needs to be grounded on evidence, okay? They have to generate new knowledge, okay? This is extremely important in general, okay? This is why we do research. We don't go and do the same thing that other people have done. It needs to be evidence-based and generate new knowledge, okay? So if you are taking something, okay, from the presentation today, this is probably one of the most important components, okay? Because as I said, there is no way you can design a proper study, okay, if you're not grounded on a proper theoretical framework, okay? Okay.
So we had you guys propose your research questions, and we're going to share a few here with you that we've written. So mine here is first. What elements of blog creation are LE candidates transferring to their classroom practices? And I want you to think critically about that. Good research question, not so great, kind of in the middle. What are your thoughts on it? I'm a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed doc student that's like, here's my research question. What do you think? And you're going to say to me? Vague. Vague. What else? Got to be more specific. Yep. It's very vague, right? Although I do have blog creation in there. It's like one kind of tool. I do have who I'm going to look at, the candidates. I don't have any time on there. There's other elements that could be involved in variables that I'm not even considering. And so it's a good starting point, but it needs to go through that SMART framework of how I'm missing some elements here along the way. Okay?
Okay, I mentioned to you that I do care about all these things in general, so mine is related to critical thinking, okay? So I wrote here are critical thinking skills associated with student success in college. What do you think about this question? It's also not specific, okay? I have a metric to measure critical thinking skills, okay? So I'm not worried about that portion, but associated with student success in college, student success where, okay? Is it in math classes? Is it in engineering in general? Exactly, we have to define success. Am I talking about persistent? Am I talking about, retention, graduation rate, okay? These are things we have to consider when we're writing meaningful research questions.
One of my interests is also to do the integration of knowledge between the basic sciences and then the translational. So what are the effects of exposure to patients on a student's success? Is that a good question, a bad question? And again, I'm repeating the success. In addition to that success word, what else? Is it good? Is it bad? So what is effect? Which type of effect? Is effect on knowledge retention? Is it effect on application of the knowledge? Is it effect on empathy? Is it effect on seeking for help or looking for new literature? It can be anything. It's way too vague.
So when you think about these three questions that we've posed here, they're really good starting points, which is probably where you guys have on your papers or on the boards here that we've written on. But think back to that generating that general statement where I had all of those blanks to have you fill in, and then I went through and filled them in with the red text. This is what we're trying to get you to do, is to think and expand it more, provide more details about what your plan is so that you can actually move forward and progress with this research.
So can I add something? Some of the questions that you raised were very vague, but there were some questions that they were too narrow, and they were just descriptive. They were not looking at something behind it. They were going to say, yes, I see an effect, or no, I don't see a benefit. So try to also think about, some of you, as I said, they were very vague, but some of you were too narrow, and the consequences is going to be just a descriptive result saying, yes, students who did this did better in Y. So think about how to make it more impactful.
So we're going back to the handout, and we're going to go to the back of the handout. So we want you to reflect on your research question, okay? Use the SMART framework that we're given, okay? Write your research question and basically tell me if you think that they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, okay? And go over your questions.
No changing from the first iteration. Just teasing. No edits allowed on those research questions.
The SMART framework, okay? We want you to think about the questions that you have written, okay? And we want to figure out how can you revise them? How can you change them? Okay, and that's part F from the handout.
Something that you added to your question
Or changed.
or changed.
How does instructor feedback facilitate involvement in discussion? And I changed it to, how does negative or positive instructor feedback affect student involvement in discussion periods?
So it got more specific, and it also had some more time, like more bounded time put on it in the second one. And I think it's pretty relevant, right? I don't know the exact literature on that, but I bet there's a lot of people wondering about instructor feedback. I'm sure there's a lot out there on instructor feedback, so it would be important to go into the literature and see what is already being discussed, but there's always a new niche or curve that we can take to what is specifically going on in our classrooms that can then be put out into the field as the next step. And I think about that when we think about those slides at the beginning where you talked about like stakeholders, like who would be interested in this? Well, would it be just people in your field, or I mean, yours is just instructor feedback, so that's everybody. That's everybody should be interested in that.
Period. So what are those discussions about? Are discussions about a case-based learning? Is a discussion about how students did on the exam and you're going through questions? So kind of narrow down, put them in the situation where someone else could be more correlated, say, oh, I can apply this into my classroom settings. Kind of provide more information about what is that discussion periods and what are the consequences. Just put yourself on the student's perspective. The students will participate if they care. So is it a discussion that is voluntary? Is participation mandatory? Or, more details about that setting.
Come up with another way of providing feedback to students that someone have never
Mm-hmm.
used, okay, and then study that one. Any other questions that have been changed? Yes.
I actually turned my question to 4 questions.
Even better.
Sort of breaking it down into sort of more like aims. But the big sort of overall where it's kind of would go to is, does the degree of agreement between student perception of fatigue and actual sleep amounts correlate with the time spent on independent learning activities?
Ooh, that's super specific.
And so I've got, then,
Could you study faculty on sleep amounts too? And there's a lot of people that would be interested in that research, right?
Yeah. I mean, I actually was thinking about this even with the perspective of we could do this as students as well as residents with
Yes.
faculty that are, because the whole issue of faculty burnout is a big one, in especially in medicine, and probably everywhere else, and they just don't talk about it as much.
Right,
You
right.
just assume it. So I thought this might be some ways to drill down to
Yeah.
perception versus reality and how people are coping with their so I think there's
Yeah.
more questions to, which I like the idea that there's more questions to follow if we find something.
I think that's how you know you're onto a really hot ticket item, right? When you do the research and then you end up with more questions. It's exhausting,
Right.
But it's the continued of like, okay, I found this and now I'm interested in this aspect of it. But I like the way you're breaking it down to perceptions. Perceptions in my field are difficult to kind of get your hands around, but there's a lot of people out there doing it, and so there's a lot that you can pull from to say this is how this researcher did this or this team did this and it worked really well, or nope, that's not really the way I would like to structure this design. So I think that besides understanding what they're doing, looking at the design of for the methodology of it would be important for that particular question as well.
Intentional or is for leisure? So is it because the students are going on party, or is it because the students feel overwhelmed and they are studying day and night, or is it because they are working?
Yeah.
So kind of you can even break it down even further of what is the reason that they are sleep deprived.
Right, is it like a bad time management, or is it over, they've really been given too much to do, or they are actually having a lot of fun.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions?
All right.
I wasn't able to rewrite my question. I mean, I can tell you just because I pretty much can't check mark any of those boxes.
Please, let's get that on tape.
I mean, it's obvious to me that, it's the issue is that it's important and relevant to me in my department. I really don't know on the literature end if it is, how studied it is. I've been just thinking about what types of outcomes I could use for simulation. So there's clinical confidence, which is a whole thing, and I could also look at skills and competencies or academic achievement, and I'm just kind of stuck there. I don't know where to go from there. I just have to kind of brew on that, I guess, and look in the literature.
I think, definitely look in the literature, but I also think it comes down, and it was on the bottoms of what's the interest to you, right? Because if if you're not interested in the first two choices as much as yours, the third and fourth, it's hard to do a research project around a topic that you're not completely bought into, as we all know. So what's really interesting to me is that you could quickly come up with like 4 categories of like, I could do it this way, or this way. Like there's these different avenues I could look at sort of under this umbrella of a topic, which is, it's really exciting when you think about, because it might not be one of those, it might be all of those, it could be just 2 of those, you know, and it's going to depend on the design and how you sort of go about it and the variables you look at. But that's interesting. That's really interesting.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you. How about the question about, I really like the question of the help outside. Were you able to reframe it or change it or?
About the, so my more specific questions were about getting them to attend help outside of class. So was, do students that get help do better? And that was sort of broad to begin with. So I rephrased it, made it a little more specific. Do students that attend tutoring before a given exam do better on that specific exam? Because that's really what we want to compare them to, those students who didn't get help during that same exam period.
I don't know if that, the impact of that question specifically, I don't know, under my perspective as an educator, will get, okay, I'm assuming that, yes, they will do better, that kind of a preconception there, but I think what worries me the most is why students are not using our help. Why students don't seek for help? What else is going on in the life of the student that is compromising maybe the capability to find an hour to come to you? I don't know, maybe they're parents or they have sick family and they have to take care of that. So I don't know if I will step back and not just do a descriptive, yes, they did better or they did worse, but to find out the reasons why they're not coming. I kind of flip it. I flip it.
You're doing it quantitatively,
Yeah.
she's doing it qualitatively.
Yeah, I can flip that one, thinking about the impact.
One of my follow-up questions is about student attitudes after they attended tutoring. And you're right, stepping back from that to get the attitudes before they even attend tutoring.
So I don't know. I've been class advisor. I've been, mentor of students, and I think one of the factors is the personality. It's like, are you an introvert? Are you so shy that you cannot reach out for help, or you were told that because you are in university setting, you cannot seek for help, you can find your own? Are you not seeking for help because you are a first generation, and you didn't even know that was a possibility? So I think there are many things. That is amazing research area to dig in furthermore. But I don't know if you will get enough information just saying yes, impact or not impact. That's what I think.
What is happening is important, but how it's happening is equally important. Okay, so we normally do both.
There was something in the newspaper education last week about professors saying office hours and students not knowing what that meant. So the very fact of defining what an office hour is, or saying tutoring, using the specific word, ended up improving in some way, because if you just say, well, I have office hours, what does that mean? Lots of people had no idea what that meant. Does that mean I'm going to be in an office, that you're going to go somewhere to be in an office? There was no, so there's, even defining this needs to be done ahead of time, so.
Anybody else?
I was going to say that goes back to my original statement of the setting it up, right, in defining what you're talking about there. And that is a great example of like defining office hours. Like that has to be under the general concept of the question that I'm writing, because maybe the way I define office hours is very different from the way you do and you do. And so maybe that's one of the variables of why students are confused, because we're all using the same term, but we're using it very differently. And when they show up to our offices, they come to me and expect one thing, and then when they go see you, they got a very different experience. And so now they're not really sure what to expect when they go to your class's office hours, So it would be really interesting. But that's why the defining of the terms is so important from the beginning, so that it's very clear as to what you're looking at in your particular research.
Okay. I mentioned at the beginning a theoretical framework, and we're talking about the background in general, background information that you will use for your research question, okay? So when I mentioned to you that all research questions must be grounded in some sort of theoretical framework, okay? And what we're basically looking is at the structure that supports a theory behind that research study, okay? This is, someone mentioned grit, okay? There is a theory. Aimee, I think she's in Philadelphia, she has all the gritness scale and all that theory, okay? Every concept, student engagement, okay? There is a theoretical framework for student engagement. There is several theoretical frameworks for critical thinking. Those topics are grounded, okay? All of them have been researched, and there are theoretical frameworks for all of them. Okay. So what we want you guys to understand is the following. For instance, if you're looking into understanding student engagement, okay, one framework that could be appropriate for your study is called flow theory, okay? Have any of you heard about flow, been on flow, okay? So if I read here, you're going to see the following. A flow state, also known colloquially as being in the zone, okay, is the mental state of operation in which a person performing an activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, fully involved, and enjoyment in the process of the activity, okay? So as I said, for those of you that are looking into measuring engagement, okay, this could be an appropriate, okay? Keep in mind that this is only one engagement framework. There are others as well, okay?
The class is over. Oh, already?
Oh,
I
we
have
are
no
in the
idea.
flow, yes.
Yeah, the
Yes.
time just fly. That is because they were on the flow.
Or you give students an activity and you try to speak with them and they are still writing, okay? They don't pay attention. They are basically in the zone, okay? If you're looking at performance in class, there are many different frameworks in general, okay? But some people look at Bandura's self-efficacy theory, okay? And what we have is the following. I'm assuming that most people know what self-efficacy is, but we're referring about the individual's belief on his ability, okay, to execute a given task, okay, necessary to produce a specific performance in general, okay? So self-efficacy has been extensively studied in general, especially for retention issues in general, okay? But as I said, if you're looking for performance, there are many different frameworks, but for those of you that are interested in self-efficacy, read into Bandura's theory, okay? Yes, I can give you critical thinking framework for those of you that are looking into critical thinking. I do research on critical thinking, but Paul Elder critical thinking framework, I use it a lot. It basically blends really beautifully with the way that we teach engineering, especially because it's all project-based problem solve kind of approaches. And as I said, that framework works really well, okay? How students learn, okay? For instance, we have a constructivism theory, okay? That talk about how people learn, okay? So basically it says that people construct their own understanding and knowledge of the world through experiencing things and reflecting on those experiences, okay? I see a lot of constructivism theory when I read people's work when they are trying to implement hands-on activities in class, okay? To make them learn a given task or learn more in depth, okay? A given topic, okay? As I said, it's extremely important for you guys to take very seriously a theoretical framework. If your work is not properly grounded, okay, when you go on to submit your paper, the reviewers may ask you later or tell you that there is a misalignment between your research question, your methodology, misalignment between your framework and your methodology. This is going to come back to haunt you, okay? So this is why I added this to this slide presentation because it's extremely important, okay? Okay, and as I said, you can use more than one framework, okay, to answer your research questions in general. You don't have to pick only one, okay? And as I said, we go back to the same thing, okay? It's basically, and everything needs to be evidence-based and it's to generate new knowledge.
So now that you have brainstormed about few exciting ideas. Now you cannot wait to go back to your office and your classroom and answer those questions. But what do you need in order to do that? Well, you will have to know how are you going to address the question. Which type of assessment do you need to measure, right? Are you going to just count how many students are stopping at your office to see how many of them are being engaged or going to office hours? Are you going to count how many students are successfully passing a task on a stimulation center? Are you going to be counting how many students are using, I don't know, Google search versus Wikipedia versus going to PubMed? How are you going to do that? Which type of data are you going to collect? In case that you want to do a survey, which type of questions are you going to be asking to the students? Let's say for your sleep deprivation, how are you going to ask the questions so they are not misleading, or they are asking questions, or they are just clicking 3 on all of them? How are you going to design that type of survey? Is there any validated test or survey out there already published? Like Liz was mentioning about the grid. There is a tool already available. We are talking about humans, so we will have to have a type of informed consent, a protocol, an IRB. Sometimes it will be exempt, sometimes will be expedited, depending on whether or not we are looking at identifiers in the data or not. If we are doing an anonymous survey, usually you can submit to IRB, it will be exempt. But if you are going to be looking at students' names, you are looking at grades, that will be require many more steps. So in order to think about those things, I think there is a question at the bottom of your handout to kind of start thinking, making a laundry list of what do you need in order to address those questions that you have.
To be able to do your study, do you need any collaborator? Do you need something specific to be able to do your study? What are your variables? I'm asking many questions at the same time, sorry. Yes.
So we have a record of which students are attending tutoring and office hours and when. So we have that. Certainly we have their exam scores. But the additional thing that we don't currently have in place, a sort of survey about their attitudes prior to tutoring or post-tutoring. And that would be something additional that we haven't currently measured.
I think that would be really important because students might not be coming to office hours because they're like, I'm good, I've got it, right? And they might, or they might not, right? And you'll know that after the exam, but so having that piece that says what's their attitude or feeling beforehand, why are they choosing to come or not come, is that's like the pivot point for me and what you've talked about what's going to make it a little bit different than maybe what's out there. I don't know what's out there, but that seems like the piece that makes it a little unique to what you guys are doing here. So.
Another factor that is important is that the students are going to be talking to each other. So the experience that a particular student has when meet with you in an office, that is going to be spread out. And they say, oh, you should go to his office time because he's amazing, he's solving problems, he's super cool. So that effect is going to be seeding the influence of the students. So I think that is another factor that you should be measuring. How many they come because of initiative or because of that extra credit that you mentioned, how many are coming because someone else told them you should be coming. I don't know, just brainstorming here.
So I do research in my position, but I don't ever have to get permission because I don't have human subjects. And I feel like that's the biggest challenge for me. Like, I know the type of data, I want to report on some attendance data and summarize some grade things, but I also want to do surveys. And I just don't know how to get started and what type of permissions I need and how to find out more information on that. Because I feel like when I look through the literature, it's just kind of there, and I don't know how to step back one step.
What were the preliminary steps that the authors took to get to that point?
Yeah, so I don't know if y'all have any suggestions on that.
We do have a workshop on how to design surveys. And Kristen will be leading that survey that we can, let's go all the way to the last one. This is our next workshop, okay? So it's right here, okay? It's a set, okay? So if you need ideas on how to develop surveys, okay, information, okay, that workshop will cover that portion, okay? If we go up, sorry. That's okay. We want to know a little bit about you in general, okay? So for question number 8, you guys don't have to write anything. We will write it, but we want to know what are the challenges that you currently face in your SoTL project, okay? We're trying to figure out how to help people in general, okay? So if there is something that you need from us or from the Teaching and Learning Commons, we have Aimee in the back, okay? We need to know, okay? So we're looking for some feedback.
About how to basically get started with human subjects, right? So I mean, you have to start with the IRB process. And I would look at their website and see when their trainings are, because you can go to the IRB and like open a new protocol, but just sitting through their informational session will make the process so much smoother for you rather than trying to just fill in tabs that you're not really sure what you need and what you don't need. They're also extremely responsive when you have a question. So I know for myself, when I've done IRB protocols, I put them in, they always get kicked back with a suggestion or recommendation or requirement for what's needed before it becomes approved. And it's very explicit. Like, it will say, you need this, this, and this, and you know exactly what you have to do. But if you still have a question, I just call them. And I call like the 1-800-IRB number that's on their website, and then that person directs you to, you know, the next available person to answer your question. But they're very responsive, they're very helpful. And that is actually where I would start, just so that you have the right information that you need. So I'd look on their website to see where their trainings are. We will have one, but it won't be until next fall, I believe this. Yeah.
I was just going to say, and there's a new format called the Flex format that is very, very quick. When you're just doing a survey that's not invasive, it's a really nice, easy, quick way to get your IRBs in. We've had some people get them turned around in 24 hours.
Yes. So there is a new Flex format for the IRB when it's only a survey and it's not invasive. And it's anonymous. That has to be anonymous, right?
Non-invasive.
Yeah. The other thing that you might need, you will need, is that in order to become a PI, an investigator, principal investigator for a protocol, you will have to go through a CT training.
Yep.
And I don't know if any of you have done a CT training for human samples or science. There is one on social studies. So usually surveys will be more into the social studies. And that is online. That is, it takes, you know, one morning of your time. And you will have different self-study modules, and then you will have a quiz based on the different ones. If you try to submit a protocol without having that training, IRB is going to come back and say, hey, you don't have this training. Go and get this training. And it's a social studies investigator. Basically, it's teaching you about all the ethics that you have to have when you are, because we are in a power position, right? We can force our students, hey, you have to follow that survey. So how to compensate that?
Let me ask a follow-up question about this, because I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around what I'm doing these things in my classroom. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I forget.
So I run research with human subjects, so I get that part, but this seems different to me because I'm already doing these things in my classroom, and I may or may not publish it. So if I don't, publish it and I just want it, like, I guess it seems like it's different, but maybe is it just always, no matter what, you're going into it, evidence-based practice, you get an IRB? Am I making...
So when you don't publish, at least that's what I was told, you are just trying to improve your teaching experience for the next group. You don't have to submit an IRB.
Program development, so if you're working on program development.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that you would, you know, there's reasons to publish, but also maybe...
If you, just for your mere your way of how can I improve my course,
Yes.
then it's no.
My understanding is if you're not disseminating it
Exactly.
in any way.
It's about the dissemination.
And it's about the dissemination, you know, to broad audiences. Like if you're talking about it with a colleague within your program, I don't know that that's considered dissemination. I think it's probably more program development. But if you've got some, again, I hate to fall back on call the IRB, but if you've got some like intricate piece that you're looking at, you really want to get it cleared with them. I can tell you that when I've done things in the past with my classes, I just put it through. Now, I've done them before, and I already have the city training, so I don't have to do the time to get all those sort of things sort of ramped up before I do it. But typically it comes back and it will say like, this is just typical classroom practice. But in my mind, I feel better that I went through the IRB and I have a letter from them that says, we've seen this, we know what you're doing, and we say this is just typical classroom practice. Like if I'm changing something, if I'm going to go from, you know, asynchronous discussion to a synchronous discussion, now I'm going to look at the change, that would probably be considered just typical classroom practice. I'm just changing something to improve it. And now I'm going to look at the implications of that change. And then I'm going to disseminate it. But I want that piece of paper on letterhead from the IRB that says, we have looked at it and we agree that this is just typical classroom practice.
Gotcha.
So it takes a little bit more upfront time, but it helps me sleep at night because I know that I've had the people that do this every day and look at these things, say this is what we're all in agreement on here. So.
Okay.
Because think about confidential information from the students, but also FERPA, right? So if you are saying that the class of 2020 did poorly on your class, basically you are saying that that generation of students were, you know, can be stigmatized because they show a poor score in your.
So something.
So kind of.
Yeah. Something else to consider is, I know that often when I'm thinking about my classes, a lot of it. I mean, while I reflect all the way through the semester, a lot of my reflection comes at the end, like, I did this, or I changed that, or I give this kind of feedback different. So you can, again, submit an IRB, but you can do it for historical data. And so that is when you no longer have those students in your class doing those things. So the power structure is different, and the IRB comes back and basically says, this is on historical data, and we're going to approve it for these reasons, or you need to make these changes because of this. But it's like a different, I don't know if it's a different classification to them, but to me it's different because it's not like an active data set. It's what I already have. Like if I'm looking at, in my world, lesson plans, I've already got all the lesson plans. I'm just going to do it after the fact.
So it's retrospective versus prospective.
Right. Yeah.
Like what you then clear.
And it's usually exempt when you do historical. So.
Okay.
So it's just something to think about, a different way to sort of think about if you're already doing a simulation in one class and you're not doing it in another, you can pull the data from your observational notes or whatever it is you collect throughout the semester because you're already doing those things. Now you're just going to look at it and analyze it a little bit differently. But again, I would put that through the IRB so that they see, yes, that is exactly what you're doing, and we would consider that to be historical data, and you no longer can, make the student do your survey so that they can get at the grade that they want, kind of thing.
Right. Okay,
Yep.
that makes
Does
sense.
it make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
I just quickly wanted to go back to your question here about like where do you start. I think the biggest thing is just jump in. Just jump in and do it. Like there's no starting point, right? There's just all these cats that you sort of have to herd in to do this, which is come up with your question around the course and your students and complete the city training if you don't have that and talk to the IRB. It's not a linear process by any means. So I think just jumping in and getting started with it is really sort of where we started this presentation of, how do you design a research question? We're hoping that you walk out of here with this and think, okay, I've got some things in play. Now I'm ready to take the next steps because I've got a preliminary plan of how I'm going to do this. Because what is the most important thing? Your research question. So.
Okay, I think we are running out of time. We want you to also keep in mind that there is more than just the research question and theoretical framework. You have to have an excellent, well-defined experimental plan, and you have to have an evaluation plan, okay? So those are also components of your SoTL project, okay? So wrapping up, thank you all for coming and spending some time with us. We're going to stay around in case you have other questions, and thank you.